Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to address the same issue that Senator Brown raised, the issue of trade, and I want to thank him and commend him for not only his leadership on this issue for many years, his time in the U.S. House of Representatives and now in the Senate for the last 8 years, but especially his work and his focus on this issue most recently, because we're moving into a period now of great debate about trade promotion authority and trade agreements that will be debated and debated here in the Senate and throughout the country. So I want to commend him for that. And what Senator Brown spoke to was a basic economic insecurity that so many Americans feel, and it didn't just arise in the last couple of years. This is a long-standing problem and a long-standing threat to people's economic security. And trade plays a role in it, or I should say trade agreements play a role in it. I spoke the last time when Senator Brown and I were here about the concerns I had about these trade agreements, but also the specific concern about jobs, or the adverse impact on jobs since the North American Free Trade Agreement and then subsequent trade agreements in the intervening years. Today I rise to talk about a related but very urgent issue, and that's the issue of wages. Senator Brown spoke to this as well. We know that middle-class spending power is the main driver of our economic growth and the foundation of the American dream. If people have money in their pocket because they have reasonable and fair wages, they're going to drive the economy in a much more substantial way. But in recent years, this spending power that I speak of most Americans has fallen dramatically. According to the Federal Reserve, the average worker's weekly earnings were 15% lower in 2012 than in 1972 when adjusted for inflation. So just in that roughly 40-year time period, wages down in real dollars by 15%. Senator Brown referred to a disconnect between productivity and wage growth. And there was a recent a chart that was developed by the Economic Policy Institute, and the source for this is the Economic Policy Institute analysis of Bureau of Labor Statistics and Bureau of Economic Analysis. I'll hold it up, but it's not big enough for people to see. But you can see a big line in the middle of this chart. And because it's a chart, I won't enter it into the record, but I'll refer to it. The basic conclusion is, when you look at the question of productivity growth and wage growth from 1948 to 2013, here's what you find. It's a two-chapter book. Chapter 1 is a positive chapter. Chapter 2 is really disturbing, and it's one of the most significant charts I've ever seen on what has happened to the wages of working Americans. Here's what it says: 1948 to 1973, productivity up 96.7%, hourly compensation up 91.3%. So the difference between productivity increase and wage increase, basically from World War II to 1973, was a differential of about 6 percentage points. So, as Senator Brown mentioned, an alignment over that time period between wages and productivity. That makes sense, right? When workers are producing more, when the economy is as it was after World War II, producing so much more, wages should go up in a commensurate manner. But unfortunately, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 of this book starts in 1973, and it ends on this chart in 2013. In that 40-year time period, productivity was up again. Now, it wasn't up 96.7%, but it was up 74.4%. So still strong productivity increase between 73 and 2013. What, you might ask, happened to wages? Was it still aligned? Was there a gap? Was it exactly the same? Unfortunately, the story is a terribly sad story. Hourly compensation, 1973 to 2013, up a grand total of 9.2%. So in the first period, wages were up 91.3%. In the second period, 1973 to 13, wages only up 9.2%. No one No one in this body, no one in the other body in Congress, no one who represents the American people in Congress or any state legislature, no one who represents our country can be satisfied with a 9.2% wage growth over 40 years when we were still having robust productivity increases. There are a lot of reasons for it. There are a lot of causes we could make that we could attribute to that terrible diminution. But we got to do something about it. And part of that is having an agenda that will speak to wages in the middle class and not to the issues that are in front of us, including these trade agreements. I would argue, without a doubt, that our trade agreements have made this problem significantly worse over the last 20 or 25 years, and I'm afraid we're headed down that path where the Trade Promotion Authority, or the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership, enacted into law. Here's what that wage diminution meant in Pennsylvania. Just another period of time, a shorter period of time, about 15 years. In Pennsylvania, median household income fell by 3% in the 15 years between 1998 and 2013, according to the Census Bureau. But this trend that we're talking about continues today. Even as our economy recovers and the stock markets reach record high, the average American's paycheck is barely keeping up with the rising cost of living. So this problem of lack of wage growth is not anywhere near being solved. The decline in middle-class workers' purchasing power, another way of saying wages, is not just unfair, but economic analysis also shows that it's a drag on our economy, which is primarily driven by consumption. So this isn't just a story of a worker and his or her family being pulled down by very powerful forces and only having their wages go up 9% in 40 years. It's also about the wider economy. If folks don't have fair wages, it's going to drag down the economy, and we're seeing evidence of that over those 40 years. But instead of enacting policies that help the middle class and focus on this issue of wages or the lack of growth of wages, such as policies such as increasing the minimum wage, that would be the right thing to do, one of the right things to do to go at this problem. Facilitating access to high-quality child care. For a lot of families, the second highest cost they have, other than housing and maybe some other expense. But it's usually housing or some other expense, and number two usually is the cost of child care. It's a barrier to work. If you can't afford child care, you can't go to work, or you have to accept a job that pays less. Extending relief to workers displaced by foreign competition. I would put the word unfair foreign competition. That's something else we should work on. So if we're working on raising the minimum wage, growing the middle class, helping families pay for child care, helping families pay for the terribly high cost of higher education, maybe no other number is more disturbing other than this wage 9% and 40-year number that I mentioned. Maybe the only other number more disturbing is the cost of college education going up higher than anything in our lives the last couple of decades. So middle-class workers know that this type of policy that some are pursuing is headed in the wrong direction. So instead of them seeing us working on policies that will advance and support the middle class, they see Congress considering a massive trade agreement with 11 Asia-Pacific countries. So these same middle-class families that look to us for progress and action and results for the middle class and for their wages are seeing a lot of folks in Washington focus on trade agreements that will make the problem worse. A recent Pew poll of the nation found that 83% of Americans said free trade does not raise their wages, and 45% said so-called free trade lowers American wages. For many years, many economists have argued that trade was a net positive for Americans and did not have a noticeable impact on wages. However, Recently, I think other economists are having a different perspective. A 2009 paper by 3 economists, one of them from the University of Pennsylvania, found that when workers are displaced by trade and switch jobs, they suffer real wage losses of between 12 and 17%. So in light of this data by economists, it says that when you have a job switch or a job change because of trade, and your wages are going to go down 12 to 17%, and all the other data that we have about what's happened in states like Pennsylvania or Ohio that Senator Brown represents, what's happened to those communities and those people, why would we go down the same path of ratifying agreements which will do the same over time? I don't think we should, and that's why this debate is very important. Another analysis by the Economic Policy Institute, a standard economic model shows that American workers without a college degree earn $1,800 less each year as a result of expanded trade. So again, a further exacerbation of the same problem that trade agreements lead to. And I know that people in my home state of Pennsylvania, and I'm sure this is true in Ohio and in a number of other states, they are skeptical of these deals, these trade deals, because they've experienced these pressures firsthand. This is real life for them. So before we cut another deal, we should work to level the playing field for our own companies and workers, including ensuring workers and companies get real relief from unfair trade practices. Pennsylvanians, and I think Americans, want Congress and the administration to focus on policies that lead to both good jobs and good wages. Fundamentally, I argue that these agreements cause major concerns on both fronts, the jobs front as well as the wage front. Mr. President, with that, I would yield the floor.